The Roman Empire, an unstoppable force, expanding its power from the sands of Africa to the vast plains of Europe and Asia. Its legions were like an unyielding tide, crushing kingdoms, conquering lands, and spreading their influence across the known world. But there was one land, one place, that even the might of Rome could not tame. A place where the greatest empire the world had ever known met its greatest failure. This was Caledonia, a land of mist and mystery, where the Romans would face a resistance they had never encountered before. At the height of its power, Rome was an empire without equal, a machine of war and conquest, stretching its arms across continents. Every decade, the empire grew, devouring more lands and cultures, from Gaul to Egypt, from Judea to Hispania. By 43 AD, Emperor Claudius had set his sights on the British Isles, a land of untapped resources and potential. It seemed like a simple campaign, an easy extension of Rome's boundless reach. The southern part of the island was quickly subdued by Roman legions. Tribes were pacified, cities built, and roads paved. Everything fell in line with the Roman blueprint for expansion. But north of the Roman territories, there lay a different story. A land where the Romans' greatest strength, military might, would be tested against nature itself. Caledonia, what we now know as Scotland, stood as a stubborn defiance against the empire. It was a land of harsh terrain, where the Romans found not only the fierce resistance of the local tribes, but an unforgiving environment that no amount of Roman strategy could overcome. Here, the legions faced a battle they were not prepared for. They were not fighting another army, but the very land they sought to conquer. Rome's legions were the most disciplined fighting force the world had ever seen. They built roads where none existed, raised fortifications in the most hostile lands, and created an empire that seemed invincible. But Caledonia, with its unrelenting weather and rugged landscape, was a challenge unlike anything the Romans had faced before. The Roman way of war, relying on precise strategies, well-organized supply lines, and calculated movements, began to falter in the face of nature itself. The first major obstacle was the terrain. The Roman legions, trained for battle on open fields and straight roads, found themselves marching through dense forests, over steep hills, and across boggy, unstable ground. The swamps swallowed their horses and carts, and the narrow mountain passes left little room for maneuvering. Even the famous Roman roads, symbols of their empire's strength, failed to withstand the constant rain, the erosion, and the constant threat of attack. Yet it wasn't just the land that stood against them. The very weather of Caledonia seemed to conspire against the Romans. The rain never stopped. The fog rolled in thick and fast, making it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. The Romans were used to battling their enemies, but here they faced an enemy that they couldn't defeat. An environment that wore down their morale, slowed their progress, and turned every day into a struggle for survival. While the Romans struggled with the unforgiving landscape, the Picts, native to Caledonia, knew their land like the back of their hands. Unlike the Romans, who relied on central governments and large-scale armies, the Picts were a collection of independent tribes, each with its own leadership and ways of life. They didn't seek empire or conquest. They only wanted one thing: to live free on their land, and they were willing to fight to the last man to keep it. The Picts didn't engage in the kind of formal battles that the Romans were accustomed to. There were no grand armies marching across the open field. Instead, the Picts used guerrilla tactics, ambushing Roman patrols, raiding their camps under the cover of darkness, and using the terrain to their advantage. The Romans, with their rigid formations and battle plans, were helpless against these hit-and-run attacks. Most striking of all, the Picts didn't need cities or fortresses to defend. They lived in small, scattered communities, often in the remote, mountainous areas of Caledonia, where the Romans couldn't easily reach. Their villages were built on elevated ground, making them nearly impossible to attack head-on. When the Romans attacked one tribe, the others would simply disappear into the hills, only to return days later to strike again. The Picts fought not just with weapons, but with a fierce resolve. They didn't want Roman roads, Roman citizenship, or Roman civilization. They didn't need to be saved by the Romans. They rejected everything that the empire offered. And in doing so, they stripped Rome of its greatest weapon, the ability to absorb conquered people into its empire. The Picts didn't want to become Romans. They just wanted to survive, and in that, they were victorious. As the years passed, the Romans began to realize that Caledonia was unlike any land they had conquered before. It wasn't about defeating armies or capturing cities. It was about survival. The Roman legions, once unbeatable, began to feel the weight of their struggle. The Picts' guerrilla tactics wore down the Roman soldiers, their morale sinking with every ambush, every attack in the dead of night, and every failed attempt to occupy the land. Rome had always relied on its ability to build, to conquer, and to absorb. In every other conquest, Roman rule meant the construction of roads, the establishment of cities, and the assimilation of local leaders. But in Caledonia, there was no foundation to build on. The Picts rejected Roman authority, refused to trade, and scorned the Roman way of life. And so, with each failed attempt to secure the region, the Romans began to question the cost of this war. The Roman army, once invincible, was stretched thin. The soldiers were exhausted, their supplies were dwindling, and their health was deteriorating. Disease spread rapidly among the ranks, and the ever-present wet and cold seemed to sap the strength from the legions. Roman sources from the time report increasing rates of dysentery and fevers, illnesses that made the soldiers' lives even more unbearable. Even after the construction of Hadrian's Wall, a massive fortification that stretched from the Irish Sea to the North Sea, Rome couldn't hold on to Caledonia. The wall, built to protect Roman territory from the Picts, symbolized Rome's failure. It wasn't a victory. It was an acknowledgement that Rome's efforts to conquer the north had come to an end. The wall marked the furthest point that Rome could reach, and beyond it lay a land that would remain free. Rome's final attempt to conquer Caledonia came in 208 AD, nearly a century after the construction of Hadrian's Wall. Emperor Septimius Severus, now older and ill, led one last campaign to crush the Pictish resistance once and for all. With an army of over 50,000 soldiers, Severus was determined to finish what his predecessors had started. He marched north, prepared to annihilate the tribes that had defied Rome for so long. But even Severus's overwhelming force couldn't conquer Caledonia. The same challenges that had plagued the Romans from the start, disease, treacherous terrain, and Pictish guerrilla tactics, took their toll on the Roman legions. The relentless rain, the cold, and the difficult landscape wore down even the mightiest soldiers. Severus himself, weakened by illness, could not continue the campaign and died shortly after the campaign began. His death marked the end of Rome's last serious effort to dominate the north. The Romans, faced with defeat and exhaustion, withdrew from Caledonia for good. The Picts had triumphed, not through grand battles, but through their resilience and their refusal to yield. They had fought not for conquest, but for survival, and in the end, they succeeded. Caledonia became more than just a region that Rome could never conquer. It became a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. The Romans, with all their might, were humbled by a land and a people who simply refused to submit. It wasn't about military strength, but about the will to survive. The Picts didn't need Rome, and they proved it in the most powerful way possible, by standing their ground. So what can we learn from this? In the end, it wasn't Rome's failure that made Caledonia legendary, but the Picts' determination. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't about defeating your enemy. It's about refusing to give up, no matter how impossible the odds seem. Rome's greatest empire, with all its strength, couldn't defeat the spirit of a people who weren't interested in conquering the world. They just wanted to protect their own. Thank you for joining us in this journey through history. Do you think Rome could have eventually conquered Caledonia if they had tried harder? Or was their defeat inevitable from the start? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's greatest resistance stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating tales of history's hidden chapters.